in the 16th chapter of St. Matthew, beginning at the 21st verse. From that time on, after Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and to be killed, and on the third day to be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Then Jesus told his disciples, If any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up the cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what he has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. I don't think any of you need to be reminded that we are at the beginning of a new football season. And probably the last thing you wanted to hear when you came to church this morning was something about football, but I'll have to start there because I use the everyday events of the week to reflect on the gospel, and in this case, we have a very, very close correlation between what's happening in the football world and what happens in the football world and what happens to the church. Give you a minute to think about that. So we start out yesterday, and there are a lot of expectations. And to the amount of expectation the team has, on that expectation they will be judged. So I think Texas is rated in the top 10. I think 6th, is that correct? 11th. They fell from grace. Anyway, there are high expectations, just like there were last year. The problem was they didn't meet the expectations. And who really is on the line is the coach, as much as anybody. Because if there are great expectations, and you get a lot of people who have transferred to your team who are outstanding, and who've been come from another team, there are huge expectations of what's going to happen. The coach is on the line. Now, there's not much talking about Sarkeesian this morning because they expected to beat Rice. I mean, they've beat them every year since 1984. The next week they got Alabama. And on that game rides an awful lot. If Sarkeesian does as well as he did last year with Alabama, he might not be under too much criticism because everybody expects Alabama to beat Texas. If he wins, he will be really revered. And they will have more and more expectations. As a matter of fact, they will have expectations that will probably exceed their ability. But everyone knows that at the beginning of the season, the coach can be revered, and by the mid-season, he can be a case for dismissal. A hero one time, a cad the next. And I don't think Sarkeesian will get away with having a season like he did last year. You can fall from grace pretty quickly. as a coach. But if you look at our gospel text this morning, nobody fell from grace faster than the Apostle Peter. If you've been here for the last 2 weeks, you understand that those were glorious things spoken of Peter. 2 weeks ago, he was walking on water. He was the one that's heralded as the brave man who was willing to get out of the boat, even if it was to sink. He was the one that had the ability to get out and walk to Jesus. And last week, my goodness, that's the highest Peter ever gets in the gospel. The Catholic Church is built on that text. For thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build a church, my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And this is only a few verses down the line, but probably the next day in the recording of this gospel. And our gospel text, Jesus looks at Peter and is very uncharacteristic. He says, Peter, get me behind you, Satan. You are a stumbling block to my ministry. 1 week, thou art the rock I will build my church on. The next week, you are the devil. You belong in hell. Get behind me. A stumbling block. And that's the word we're going to concentrate on this morning. Stumbling block. Peter became a stumbling block. How can you go from being a hero, the head of the church, to a stumbling block? It seems pretty easy. Just as easy it is for a coach to go from greatness to being fired in a single season, maybe in a couple of games. So what was it that made Peter a stumbling block? It's kind of interesting. In the earlier translations of this gospel, they use a more gentle word. In King James it says, thou art an offense to me. And in the Revised Standard, you are a hindrance. But the Greek word that is used is much harsher. It's in tune with that, you are the devil. You are a stumbling block to the ministry. So what was it that made Peter a stumbling block? And then we need to reflect on how we become stumbling blocks, because they are the same. And I've selected 3 things, and I think pretty much they are all the same, but we need 3 points for a Lutheran sermon, right? The first thing that Peter exhibits here is he didn't understand the mission of Christ. He didn't take time to understand it. This is one of the gospel texts, and it's not the first one. It's one of the gospel texts where Jesus is trying to explain what his ministry is all about. It's all about a service, taking up the cross, living with the possibility of suffering as you give yourself to other people. And then he turns and says, my mission is to go to Jerusalem and to suffer and to die and to rise again. Peter didn't understand it then. But the problem was he didn't care if he understood it. He never really did sit down with Jesus and say, how are you going to do this? What really is the end result of our work, our following you? And actually, we've given up everything that we have to follow you, and we want to see some results. Now, what he had in mind was something quite different than Jesus. And I guess that clouded him from seeing what the mission was. But if you don't understand the mission, if you don't ask what we're doing, what our purpose is, where we're going, then you become a stumbling block. And that's what happens in the church. We don't understand if we have a mission. Sometimes I ask you, what's our direction? What is going to happen in 5 years? What have you got in mind for this church? It's a puzzling question. Do we have a mission, a goal? I know the evangelism committee is trying to establish one. Are we going to be a church that really serves the countryside? Because we have had opportunities for that, and we kind of let some of them go. If we don't have a mission, we understand what the mission is about the church, then we're going to become a stumbling block. Because the mission of the church is to be the leaven and society of God's grace. The concept of the church is to be a place that witnesses to God, the Great Commission. Go make disciples. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to be a stumbling block. And by the way, I have to make a disclaimer here. Some people ask me, when you create the sermon, are you having some people in mind that you're preaching to? Because sometimes while you were preaching to me this morning, I don't do that. Do I preach to someone? Yes, I do. I preach to what I think I need to hear. Because, if you stick me in the arm, I'll bleed just the same as you. And I figure if I need something, you probably do too. Do I think that I become a stumbling block? Absolutely. Have been. In every parish I've been, at one time or another, I've been a stumbling block, even though I want to proclaim the gospel. The second thing, Peter thought the personal was more important than the whole. He was so concerned about himself and what his goals were, what his agenda was. He really didn't care what it was for the rest of the apostles, or Jesus, for that matter. As a matter, he took Jesus to the side and rebuked him. You're crazy, you can't do this, and I won't let it happen. It doesn't fit with what I think should happen. You ever think that sometimes your agenda is more important than anybody else's? I certainly have. Each apostle had his personal agenda. Peter wanted to be a leader. He wanted to stand out. He wanted to have the acclaim. James and John wanted to be on the right hand and left hand of Christ when he came into his kingdom. He asked for that. Judas wanted money. John wanted a personal relationship and wanted to know his personal relationship with Jesus was more profound than anybody else's. He writes the book, and when he talks about himself, he says, and the disciple that Jesus loved. As contrasting to all these other people. Agenda. What I want, what I need from the church is a lot more important than the whole. What's good for everybody. We all do that at one time or another. And then we become stumbling blocks. For the good of the whole. One of the things I hear so much now for those who've gotten used to staying home during the pandemic, is that really you need to come back to church? It's so nice sitting in my bathrobe and pouring a cup of coffee and having a piece of toast and sitting there and listening to the sermon. And I get what I need at home. Yeah, you do. If that's all that's important, that you get something. But when you come and assemble as a group, you should be able to give each other something important in terms of worshiping the same God and feeling like you're a family, a church family, and you care about each other and you share each other's burdens on Sunday morning together. There's a reason for worship. And yes, you can get what you want staying home, but you can't get that anybody else anything if you don't participate. There was a parable written by one of the ministers, and he said it was a parable written by Soren Kierkegaard, and I don't think it was, because he died in 1855, and this illustration doesn't seem to be from the 1850s. He tells a parable that there was a fire in a town, and the fire marshal was very revered. And so when he heard the fire, rang the bell and started off to get to the fire, and he saw a mob of people out there with squirt guns, and they were squirting at the fire. He said, "What in the world is going on here?" And one of the people spoke up and they said, "We revere you so much, we want to help you out. We're going to help you put out the fire." And the fire marshal said, "Get out of here. I don't need a lot of well-meaning people who have limited capability." What a statement. Don't need well-meaning people with limited capabilities. Because if you're limited in your commitment, you become a stumbling block. There's another interesting little thing that was posted. A new seminary graduate went to his first parish, and he went to an inner city parish, and he started ministering to the people in the community. And some of the people from the lower social economic classes came to church and got involved, and there was an outcry from the old guard that said, "Why are you letting these people in here?" And so he said, it got so hot for him, they said, "We're going to have to call a congregational meeting." And so he said, "We're going to vote on one issue." And he wrote the Great Commission from Jesus from the end of Matthew. It said, "Go into all nations, witness to all the people, making disciples of all nations." And he said, "This is the Great Commission." He said, "We're going to vote on that. Does the church want to really respect this Great Commission of Jesus and minister to the neighborhood? Or are we just for our people?" He put it in the form of Great Commission, and he said they voted out the Great Commission. Sometimes we can become stumbling blocks just because we want our agenda more than anybody else's. And the third one is kind of the same as the other two. It has to do with self. Just arrogance. Just arrogance. I want to be in charge. I want to be in control. And that was Peter. It's hard to believe some people come and feel that they're superior to everybody else, even though they don't have the background to back it up. Can you imagine Peter taking Jesus aside and said, "You don't know what you're doing. This isn't the way it's going to happen. I got a different plan of salvation." How could Jesus say anything else but, "Get behind me, Satan. You're more concerned about the things of mankind than you are of heaven." Most of the fights in church are not over theology. There's nobody in the churches that doesn't believe that Jesus died and rose again. None practically in the major churches that don't believe in the Trinity or most of the concepts of the Apostles' Creed. It's over little things. And who controls? Hubris. I know it better than you. And when we do that, we become stumbling blocks. Coaches will come and go. They'll be high and they'll fall low. One thing in the church is very often we can be so ardent supporters, and sometimes we can so get in the way. Peter is a perfect example. What you need to do is examine yourself and decide how you will not become a stumbling block in God's immortal plan. Amen. Sermon hymn is 790, Day by Day. Please stand if you are able.